Play different.
Glider 4.0 was a huge advancement over the original shareware game. Most obvious is that color was added, a whole 16 of them in fact, but the design itself is what really drastically changed. After all, the original game was only 15 rooms which the player progressed through from left to right, basically making the game take place in one long hallway. When the creator, John Calhoun, contacted software publisher Cassidy and Green about a potential commercial version, he knew he couldn't just add another 40 rooms to the existing 15. I mean, that would be one hell of a hallway and would feel just a little bit silly. Instead, he took the game to the next level, literally, by adding stairs which allowed the player to move between floors. Additionally, horizontal movement was no longer constant, and it was now possible to go left as well as right between screens, so basically the game allowed players to freely roam around houses, and that's what levels were called in Glider 4.0, houses. The core of the game is still the same. Fly a paper plane through a house, use air vents and such to navigate around obstacles, with the goal to find the open window allowing you to escape to the outside world. There are many new obstacles and tools in this version too, such as switches which can turn lights and devices such as shredders and fans on and off, jars of oil which can be knocked over allowing the player to safely slide across surfaces, in addition to new power-ups such as rubber bands which allows players to shoot, and batteries which give them a speed boost. In fact, with all these new features and the way the included house uses them, many rooms feel like simple navigational puzzles, and some of the larger and more complex houses felt like flying through mazes. But it was also about speed if you wanted a high score, as the quicker you moved through a room, the higher your bonus would be. Now, I liked the simplicity of the original Glider, but there is no denying that Glider 4.0 is a far more interesting game to play. Plus, there was nothing to stop people from making simple maps with the incredibly easy to use editor, even if it didn't quite allow the creative freedom which Glider Pro would later offer. Oh yes, the editor. This was a big deal, and it led to a large community which helped extend the life of the game by literal years via the creation of new houses for people to play. This was also helped by the growing popularity of America Online at the time, which made it easy to share and download new houses. Interestingly, Cassidy and Green didn't request the editor. Like the rest of us, they just wanted a bigger house. But Calhoun suggested making one since he would have to make an editor for himself anyway, and so that ended up in the contract too. At first he regretted it, because a private editor for his own use isn't too much hassle, but actually polishing it up for the general public is an entirely different matter, and he ended up spending more time on the editor than on the actual game. Of course, in the end he's glad he did it, as not only does he believe that it helped with sales, it also gave him no end of pleasure to see the creativity and fun others had in designing their own houses. He was even certain that there were people who enjoyed the creative process more than playing the actual game. In fact, some houses impressed him so much that he contacted the creators and hired them to help with the successor, Glider Pro. For example, Ward Hartenstein was brought on board due to his Rube Goldberg style level, hands-off house. One feature that was removed from the original shareware game was the ability to play as a paper dart. This was because it was simply too difficult to design levels around both types of planes. He toyed with the idea of having a power-up that transformed the glider into a dart, but settled for the battery power-up instead. The mood of Glider 4.0 is a little dark, not in a horror or threatening way, but there is a claustrophobic feeling to it, what with being stuck in a house with a storm raging outside, which reveals itself to be a tornado when you finally escape. The storm was a nod to Calhoun's home state of Kansas and its appearance in The Wizard of Oz, and also to his own childhood, as it was on those stormy days that he would find himself stuck inside and had to amuse himself with things like paper airplanes and his imagination. It was also a result of the limited colours he had to work with, and also inspired by his surroundings, as the places he frequented at the time in Lawrence, Kansas tended to be a bit run down. I think the thing Calhoun said about using his imagination as escapism is what Glider 4.0 is really about to me. Toasters, fans, and furniture are all mundane, especially when you're a child stuck indoors. But when imagining them as obstacles that must be puzzled through with a paper plane, boredom transforms into adventure. It reminded me of road trips when I was a child, where I would play imaginary video games with the passing scenery outside the window. Aside from the most recent glider made for iOS and newer macOSes, Glider 4.0 is Calhoun's favourite of the series. While most people seem to prefer Pro, Calhoun felt that it was just too out there and unrestrained, and feels that 4.0, with it being limited to inside a single building, made it feel more quaint. He even says that he may one day revive this particular version, with the main change being actual scrolling as seen in the most recent glider, rather than the flick screens seen here. Now, Glider 4.0 is a fantastic game, but there are a few issues that I have with it. For one, there are some rooms which, thanks to starting in pitch darkness, require some trial and error to get through. You can save anywhere, of course, but that kills your chance of a high score. I should also note that this is a problem with the design of the included default house. It's definitely not an issue with every user-made house out there. The second and bigger problem, in my opinion, is that paper darts, balloons, and helicopters will spawn at seemingly random times at random locations on the screen. It can be very frustrating when you're just about to get through a very tricky room, only to be wiped out by a helicopter that just happens to spawn right above you with seemingly no possible way to avoid it. This was a problem that was remedied in the sequel, Glider Pro, and again, user-created houses didn't have to use these obstacles, though they often did. Those are my only two gripes, however, which is pretty impressive considering how picky I can be. An expansion pack was released called More Glider, which included a brand new house from Calhoun, plus 7 more from other creators. It was sold via mail order for $20 beginning in late 1992, and was eventually included with the game itself. Cassidy and Green were interested in entering the Windows market, which led to a port of Glider 4.0 to the OS in 1994, primarily done by Greg Beezer. It was compatible with houses created on the Mac and shipped with the More Glider houses, but had no editor itself. Proving that Glider wasn't only considered a good game on the Mac, it reviewed well in PC magazines at the time, receiving an 84 out of 100 from the well-regarded magazine PC Gamer. Keep in mind that this was an era when Doom clones were all the rage, which makes the score even more impressive. Luckily, no one seemed to notice, or at least care, that the game only took up 3.3 megabytes on the CD. Unfortunately, it didn't sell as well as they had hoped, which Calhoun chalks down to Cassidy and Green having inexperience with marketing to Windows users. With Calhoun's permission and approval, Glider 4.0 even had a homebrew port to the NES. A later version called More Glider was also made, and as of recording, is still available for purchase at retrousb.com. Glider 4.0, along with some of Calhoun's other games, were made open source in 2016. The game itself became freeware when the rights reverted to him after Cassidy and Green went out of business in 2003. Speaking of the game's publisher, Calhoun actually contacted Maxis first, the people behind SimCity, but never heard back. Cassidy and Green was his second choice, and he got a bonus color Mac out of his publishing deal with them. He also used said Mac to create Glypher 2 to cut his teeth on the new technology. Here is a fun bit of trivia. In the background you can sometimes see a book called Hackers. This is a reference to Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, a book that helped Calhoun get into computing. And that is the story of Glider 4.0 and how it was hugely expanded from a short 15-screen game. It's not the end of the Glider story itself though, as there are still 2 main entries left to visit.